Third won't hold the grade. You're loaded heavy, the engine starts to lug, the hill just keeps climbing, so your hand leaves the wheel and finds a second stick. There shouldn't be a second stick, but there it is, a few inches from the first one, and the box it answers to is the only reason this truck is going over the top. Every old hand called it the Brownie, and it might be the single most misunderstood piece of iron that ever rode in an American truck, because the gearbox that let these machines climb mountains they had no business climbing started life as a flat failure, a part nobody wanted, and it never actually died. Start with the name because the name is already lying to you. The Brownie comes from the Brown-Lipe Gear Company of Syracuse, New York. Clean enough, except the units got built later by Spicer, then by Fuller, and guys in shops welded up their own out of whatever they had. Through all of it, the name stuck. It stopped meaning a brand and became a category. Any over-direct under-auxiliary box bolted in behind the main transmission was a Brownie, whoever's name was cast into the housing. So, when a driver said he ran a Four-and-a-Brownie, half the time he wasn't talking about a Brown-Lipe at all. He was using a dead company's nickname the way you'd say Kleenex. For one company's word to become the only word a generation of drivers ever used, the product has to be so braided into the daily work of an industry that nobody reaches for the right term anymore. The brand outlived the company that made it and swallowed its competitors whole. Now, back up to where it came from, because this is the part that should stop you cold. The gearbox that conquered the Rockies began as a bicycle part. Its DNA is a two-speed bicycle gear called the high-low bi-gear, patented in 1894 by Alexander T. Brown and Charles E. Lipe, who formed Brown-Lipe a year later to build it. And it flopped. The bicycle makers weren't interested. The whole point, shifting between high and low to take a hill without standing on the pedals, was a hard sell to an industry that liked its bikes simple. What saved it wasn't the bicycle. It was the automobile. Carmakers suddenly had a very real problem keeping an engine in its power band, looked at this rejected two-wheeler gadget and saw exactly what they needed, and the man behind it wasn't a gear guy. Alexander T. Brown is credited with well over 100 inventions, and the gearbox is barely a footnote in his own resume. This is the man who designed the L.C. Smith breech-loading shotgun, the Smith Premier typewriter, an air rifle, an automatic telephone switchboard. Not an engineer who spent a career perfecting transmissions, a serial obsessive who couldn't walk past an unsolved mechanical problem without taking a swing at it. The same restless brain that put a typewriter on every office desk also, almost in passing, drew up the gear logic that would define heavy trucking for the next half-century. He wasn't trying to tame mountains. He was just incapable of leaving anything alone. The Brownie was never really about brute force, and that's the lie at the center of every video ever made about it. Everybody says it tamed mountains with a deep, low crawler gear. Grab the granny and climb. That's not how it worked. The crawler ratio mattered for starting heavy or creeping at a walking pace, sure, but the real magic, the thing that made these boxes legendary among the men who ran them, wasn't the low end at all. It was the gaps. Think about the problem honestly. You're climbing a long grade. Third is too tall. The engine drags down, lugging, sliding toward a stall. So you grab the next gear down, and now second is too short. The engine screams up into the noise and you're barely going any faster than you were while you were lugging. There's nothing in between. That no man's land between two ratios is where loaded trucks went to die on a grade. And the old hands knew the trick. You drop the main box to second and put the auxiliary into overdrive, and you get something that doesn't officially exist. A gear between the gears. Call it second and a half. The engine settles right into the fat part of its torque curve and holds it all the way up, pulling hard and clean instead of either lugging or howling. That's what a Brownie did. It didn't give you a lower gear. It gave you the right gear on a hill where the right gear had never existed. If you ever ran one, You didn't read that in a manual. You felt it in your right hand, hunting for that half step on a grade you'd climbed 100 times. And running it was a kind of choreography almost nobody outside the cab ever appreciated. You're steering, reading the grade, and working two gear shifts that don't talk to each other, timing the main box against the auxiliary, sometimes splitting on every shift the whole way up so the engine never once drops out of its range. Both hands moving, no synchros to save you, matching revs by ear. Get the rhythm right, and a loaded truck flows up a mountain like it's on rails. Get it wrong, and you're stalled crossways on a 7% grade with the weight behind you trying to drag you back down. There was pride in that. There still is. In the men who could do it in the dark, in the rain, without ever looking down. But splitting torque before the drive shaft came with a bill, and it's a nasty one. Run an underdrive in that auxiliary, and you're multiplying engine torque before it ever reaches the drive shaft, which is what lets you climb steeper and creep slower than the main box alone ever could. The catch is that the whole drive shaft now has to swallow that multiplied load. Ask for too much reduction with too much engine behind it, and you don't strip a gear. You twist the drive shaft itself, wring it like a wet rag right out of the truck. That's exactly why the two-speed rear axle existed alongside these boxes, multiplying torque after the drive shaft instead of before it, so when something gave it twisted out a half axle at the wheel instead of the whole shaft up the middle. Every fleet had an opinion about which one they'd rather replace at 2 in the morning. And about that second stick, there's a reason it sits in a strange spot. A modern transmission is one casting, engine, clutch, gears, all bolted up in a single package. A lot of these old auxiliary boxes weren't like that. They were divorced, frequently a standalone unit mounted out in the middle of the driveline, right where the carrier bearing, the center support that holds up a long drive shaft, would normally live. A gearbox hanging in the middle of nowhere, a third of the way down the line, doing work nothing else could. That's why those two sticks come up out of the floor in two different places, sometimes feet apart, because the boxes they answer to aren't even bolted together. One's up front behind the engine where it belongs, the other's out in the drive shaft, married to nothing but the load. And that's also why it had to go. A heavy iron box hung in the middle of a spinning drive shaft is a maintenance argument waiting to happen. More U-joints to wear out, more support to fail, more vibration working itself loose with every mile of washboard road. It worked brilliantly for decades, but a thing dangling under the truck was always going to lose, eventually, to something that did the same job without dangling at all. So you can find one in a junkyard now, and the tag reads like a foreign language, except it isn't. On a lot of the Spicer and Brown-Lipe units, the model number is a code, read position by position. The first digit is the size, the second the model, the third the speeds, the fourth the case material. A 1 means cast iron, a 5 means aluminum, and the last letter the ratio. Hand a man who knows it a rusted-out box from a dead truck, and inside 10 seconds he's told you its size, its speeds, what it's made of, and what it could pull. The whole story, written on the case, waiting 50 years for somebody to read it. The Brownie didn't die, and the reason you stopped seeing that second stick isn't the reason you think. The standalone box faded out, and people assume it lost, beaten by something better, gone the way obsolete things go. That's not what happened. In 1963, Eaton folded the Brownie's whole job inside one housing, the Fuller Roadranger, with an air-operated range shift and a twin countershaft design, two countershafts sharing the gear load instead of one shaft carrying it all. Splitting the load across two shafts was the trick. It let a single compact case handle the kind of torque that used to wring drive shafts in half, the exact weakness that haunted the old underdrives, quietly engineered out. And inside that transmission, back behind the main gears, sits a rear section holding the range gears and the splitter gears. The exact two jobs the old divorced Brownie used to do out in the driveshaft. Eaton didn't kill the second box. They swallowed it. They moved the whole splitting function inside the case where you can't see it and put it on a button on top of the shift knob. So that second stick a driver used to reach for, hunting for 2.5 on a grade, it's still there. It just moved to his thumb. Every 13-speed and 18-speed on the road today is running the Brownie's logic, the same gap-filling, torque-splitting trick from a rejected bicycle gear, hidden inside one housing and triggered by a flick of the thumb instead of a second stick on the floor. The mountain taming box didn't lose. It went undercover. And it's probably idling in a truck stop parking lot right now, doing the exact thing it did in 1925, while the driver doesn't even know he's using it.